Hello, my name is Campbell. I'm a medical illustrator and animator, and welcome back to this channel. So a couple of weeks ago, someone reached out to ask if we could share how we structure our Photoshop files for our medical illustrations, just so that we can give a glimpse into the way that we organize layers and how we hand things off from one artist to another or to our art directors. Today I thought I would give a sneak peek into how this file was organized, and then I'll go through a step-by-step process about how we split up our files and how we produce things. You can kind of get a little bit of a glimpse into that, and hopefully this will help you kind of keep your housekeeping in check, especially when you're working with like very complex medical illustrations. Now, the one thing before we start is the way that we work is very different from just general illustrations. As medical illustrators, we need to make sure that our files are editable later on down the line. So for instance, we might need to turn on and off an organ, we might need to add in medical devices. So our files need to be built in a certain way that's really flexible to make these kind of like post changes, especially when a new drug comes out or a new device gets created for our clients that we're creating these things for, or if there's an upgrade on the device or something like that. The way that we structure our files are that we make sure that things are separated so that we can keep anatomy separated, but also we can kind of turn on and off specific parts of anatomy. And it means that we can also highlight things really easily if we wanted to highlight certain things or add in different kind of layer styles or effects. And also having a really good file structure in place means that you can really work well within a large team. Files can be handed off to one artist from another, or you can hand your file off to an art director and people know where to find things, okay, because there's some kind of standardization happening in there. So let's start off with this lady with the lungs, and I'm going to show you how we build that up. So first things first is I'm going to create a big file, so 3000 by 3000, 300 dpi. Okay, so let's just pull this over here, and then I'm going to save it. So I'm just going to save it. And I'm going to save it into a new version. So one thing that I can just say to everyone is save in versions, okay? Don't put in like final VO1, final VO2, just save a version. With figure drawing, the first thing that we always have is we always keep our figures separated. So for this one, we start off with a really nice line illustration of our figures, okay? So you have something like that. And the next thing that we do after that is we draw all of our anatomy in. So we place it all in like this. So we have our lung outline right here, and then we have our bronchi outline right here. And then we have our upper respiratory system outline right here. Okay, so something like this will probably get sent to an art director, signed off. We review things like line weights and everything like that, but you'll notice there's not that much happening in terms of like transparencies or anything like that. That happens in the next phase. Okay, so we want to make sure that we lock this phase down. We've got all of our outlines separated, all of our files are labeled as outline, and everything's anatomically there as well. So once that's been signed off, then we can go into the colorization part of it. So we're going to start off with a figure. So I'm going to turn everything off so there's not so much visual noise on my PSD file, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to start colorizing things. So I'm going to just start pulling in things for you just so you can check it out. Okay, oops, let me just pull that all the way down. So we split things up into separate layers, right, when we're coloring a figure. You might notice like a lot of artists, like digital artists, like to do a big block of everything, and they flatten everything, and then they lock the pixels and they colorize everything in. We need a lot of flexibility because you never know, like a client might come in and say to us, hey, can you maybe make her hair a little bit whiter so that she matches our demographic more? And by keeping things separate, even as simple as hair, we can make adjustments really quickly during the review process or things like that, okay? But if everything's on the same layer, then that makes it a little bit harder, it takes up more time. So we're trying to like, you know, future-proof this for ourselves when we're colorizing things. So our clothes are always on a separate layer. If you have a top or a bottom, make sure that's separated. Hair colors are always on a separate layer. Face features, kind of like group those all together. If you're worried that maybe your client might like have very specific feedback notes about like eye color, put those on a separate layer and label them. Then we got a mouth cavity, and then you've got the skin on the separate layer. So once you've blocked all that in, what you can do is lock pixels and then you know, just start like doing simple shading and things like that. This is black and white just for simplicity's sake. Another thing is when people colorize things, sometimes they're unconfident in adding in lighting and shadow. So I'm going to use the skin as an example. I'm going to lock the pixels here, but usually when I colorize things, I always use a hard round pressure opacity brush and then just kind of like paint it in on top of the layer like that. But some people might not do that. They might think like, oh, I need to test it out first before I can commit to that. So they'll make a new layer and maybe like call it shadow, and then they'll kind of like alt click and then have it affect that layer, and then they'll toggle it on and off, and then they'll make another layer, call it highlight, and then alt click, and then just like add in a super highlight layer. You probably can't see it, but like just imagine that's a highlight layer or something like that, right? And then they'll add in another one with like rim light or something like that, and then they'll add it in here, and then just like add that in like that there, right? That's fine. If that's the way that you want to work, that's totally fine. You can always adjust the opacity of things if you feel like that's not working or anything like that. That's totally fine to do that. Just make sure you label your layers as you're going through this stuff. And once you've got something that looks good, flatten it. And then make sure that you label your layers like that, okay? Commit to the change that you've put in, and then flatten everything, and then keep things simple. So when you check in, that looks good. If you're worried about like losing work, again, save in iterations. So version 1, if you're gonna make a big change, make a new version and save in iterations. You can always revert back and bring that back. Now, another thing about talking about how versatile it is to have everything on a separate layer is that we wanted to bring in some kind of like character design to this. I mean, this is a really small part, but we also added in jewelry here. So we wanted to add in a jade bracelet for this lady as well, but you'll notice that like there are things like overlapping lines now. So what we can do is that we can also add in non-destructive editing to our Photoshop files, and that's something that we always try and teach in our studios is don't do editing that means you cannot go back and revert it, okay? So for this figure, what I'm going to do is going to add in a mask. So I have a hotkey that adds in a mask. If you want to quickly add in a mask, just click on this button here and it adds in a mask. And in here, I can paint away the lines here like that. And there you go, boom, that's that done, all right? The thing is, when we send this over to a client for review, say like it's a pharma client, would be like, hey, is this figure okay to represent your image for your demographic or anything like that? They can go, yeah, that's okay. Actually, I'm not too sure about the jewelry. Can you drop the jewelry here and we can turn off that bracelet really quickly, bring everything back together. Okay, so that's like a really like simple example of how everything looks in terms of figure. So once I've done my figure, what I'm going to do is I'm going to group everything together, and then I'm going to do my housekeeping and label my group as figure. And now as an art director, if I hand this off, I know that everything that belongs to a figure is within this group down here. And I can also use, if I right click on the I button, I can also colorize my groups and color code it. So that just adds another level of organization for you, especially when you have like 50 or 60 layers coming on down the line. Not for this one, but maybe for another file. Okay, so the next thing is I've got that down. I'm gonna focus on the lungs now, right? So I've got my lungs here and my bronchi and my upper respiratory system. Now, if you have a lot of organs and it gets a little bit messy, trying to colorize everything when everything's turned on is not gonna help you. So what I find is just turning off my other organs surrounding it and just focus on the one organ that I need to colorize. So we're gonna just pull this over. So this is one that Angela's done already. And so there you go. So she's done a really nice colorization of it, and then there you go. So now I have labeled lung outline, lung color. What I'm going to do is I'm going to group that. I'm going to type in lungs lobule or something like that. Okay, give it an anatomical term so that another medical illustrator can come in and know what they're going to be toggling on and off. I can even give it a color. What color did I give the lung outline? I'm going to colorize everything blue right here. So there we go. So that's that lungs. So that's done. I'm going to turn that off, and I'm going to turn on bronchi outline. So there we go. That's like 3 things that we have done. And it's a really simple, really nice file setup that we have here. But you'll notice like there's some things that look a little bit funky. Let me just disable the masks here right now, just so you can see how that all looks, all right? So that doesn't look really good. So what's the next thing that you can do is now you can go in and start editing and pushing and playing about with the transparencies and everything like that. I'm gonna pull in this one. That's a little bit more done. Okay. Now, there might be things where you need to kind of like overlap things. So you know that like the fissures of the lungs, that needs to overlap the bronchi here, okay? So what I could do here is now I can start to pull a group down underneath the lungs. And then here, I'll just write in lung lobes and bronchi. So now when I toggle it on and off, I know that everything in this group is lung lobes and bronchi. And then I'm just going to label this blue, so I know that the blues stick together and the greens are the ones that are together as well. Okay, so I hope that kind of helps in that sense. And then you'll notice that like I've started to add things like masking. So if I toggle this, you can see like this is really like rough masks happening here. on her face, and then I've added further masking onto the anatomy part, so you can see it's just kind of like further masking down here, and then everything is stuck into an anatomy group. So at the end of the day, what we end up with, we have 2 layers, one for figure and then one for anatomy. Okay, so everything you can turn on and off, and you'll notice that it's non-destructive editing because we can always disable layer masks and everything like that, and it always looks okay afterwards. So as an art director, if I ever receive something like this from an artist, feel like this is very organized, I know where things are, I can turn things off, and I can do my job effectively. I'm giving them feedback or art direction, and I would feel comfortable handing something like this off to a client if they ever need the PSD files or anything like that as well. One last thing that might be really helpful, and it's something that I learned from my first job, and thank you to all the art directors and managers and senior artists that taught me this, was adding in labeling for your own internal purposes, and also maybe for your art director's purposes or another artist if you're going to hand things off. And that's just adding in like labels, anatomy labels about where things are. Say if you're coming and approaching a new medical topic you don't know very well, or not everyone knows very well, then adding in these labels in your PSD files will really help you down the line. Because it might be a couple of months when you come back to this project and you're like, I don't really remember what the structure is. Well, you can always toggle on and off these labels, and they're only there for internal purposes. Anyways, I hope this helps, and I hope this gives you some kind of idea about how we label our files. So let's summarize some of these tips for you right now. So what we do is we separate everything into the figure and anatomy. Outline layers are always separated into their own layer. Anything that's like accessories or add-ons, that's also separated and grouped into your own layers and groups. Make sure that when you colorize things are also in their own separated label layers, because you never know, they might need to come back and edit stuff, and you might need to do highlights and stuff like that. Do non-destructive editing, which means that make sure you have masks on so you can toggle things on and off, so that if you erase something you can always revert back to a previous version. Okay, and yeah, make sure things are clean and labeled and stuff like that. So I hope that helps. I hope that gives you like a little bit of an idea about how we structure files, especially when working in a team and you're handing things off from one artist to another, or presenting stuff to an art director or a client to take a look at. Let me know if you have any questions. We would love to hear that in the comments below. If you like this kind of video, be sure to subscribe to this channel and hit the bell icon so you never miss another video. And thanks so much for checking us out.